Hi. Hello, friends. It's me again. I'm back and I have my notebooks, so you know it's serious. So, Neopets. After a decade of stagnation and neglect, Neopets has experienced a revival of sorts. And part of the promise of that new era under new independent management for the first time in years was the promise of a new plot. This is something that is very dear to my heart and is very integral to the sort of immersive experience of Neopets as a vibrant, engaging world that people feel connected to. And I think the way they were able to draw users in with this sort of immersive lore has, in my opinion, a lot to do why Neopets has sort of outshone other browser games that have had better management and has survived on, I would say life support, but I don't know if it was even getting that for so long. It's really a miracle that Neopets is still here, and I'm so grateful. And this new plot is something that I myself and many other users have been waiting years and years for. There's a lot of sort of, I don't know if I would say debate, but it's rather subjective. What constitutes a real or full-scale or a major plot versus an event or a mini plot. But by my own personal criteria, and I'm sure a lot of other people would agree with, the last full-scale major plot we had was 14 years ago with the Fairies' Ruin, and I and many others have been waiting and hoping since then to be able to have another event like this, with a comic, with puzzles, with battle-dome steps, with engaging challenges. And when the new plot was teased, titled The Void Within, I myself and the community just lit up. Since then, I'd been filling notebook pages with notes and theories and connections and trying to piece together all the different themes and hints and the characters that would be present. I have even more notes in this one, which I've shown these before in another video. I think I might have more somewhere, I don't know. But it was a huge deal. It was so exciting. And there was a lot of lore and sort of character-driven narratives sprinkled into the site content leading up to this, which I really appreciated. And I have a video that I since deleted about the Fairies' Ruin because I didn't really like how I presented things, so I didn't really want to have it on my channel anymore. But there was a piece at the end where I talked about why plots meant so much to me and how I felt about the changes and developments of this new era of Neopets, and in the lead up to the plot, sort of what my opinions were on the direction they were going. So that was about a year ago, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to look back on that and sort of see how my opinion has changed. In my opinion, the character-driven story and the way each of the main three were developed to have traits that resonate with the development of the other two were part of what made this plot so strong and iconic. I, along with many others, have been waiting over a decade to have another full-scale plot like the Fairies Rune, and I am incredibly excited to see what The Void Within has in store for us. The attention that's been given to having hints of what's to come woven into side events already gives it a great deal more weight than anything we've seen in a long time, and builds immersion, making the world of Neopia feel dynamic and alive. A lot of the significance and impact of older plots came from how they shaped the world in tangible ways that we see or interact with every day. The fall of Fairyland, the introduction of Boris, the discovery of Neovia. During the Jumpstart years, I feel a lot of that magic was lost. So I'm just elated to have that spirit of joy and wonder and discovery and excitement breathing life into Neopia once more. I'm really looking forward to seeing how color factors into the plot, because learning more or getting more insight into sort of the culture and process around painting in the actual Neopets lore is something that I've been very curious about for a long time. But my biggest hope for it is just that it will be something that will engage the community and will bring people joy in a way that we can all enjoy together. And just I want this I just want it to be a special and memorable experience for people. And for me, it already has, just reflecting on how much we've been deprived of and how much we're getting now in terms of the focus on characters and having all these pieces moving together and making events feel significant and not just something, pasted on the surface to give us something to do. It really means a great deal to me, and I was getting a bit emotional thinking about it, honestly, because it just feels so special. So, looking back on that, a lot of it, or perhaps even most of it, still rings true. Although the plot itself was, I don't think, really what anyone expected, I do honestly have some criticisms, and I'm going to be very blunt, but I want to say that it is coming from a place of genuine belief that there is a gem here. A lot of the issues I have with it are how it's sort of been managed on perhaps a corporate level, I suppose, although I don't know what's been going on exactly behind the scenes, like who has been involved in what sort of decision making. But before the plot comes back from its hiatus, which I have a lot of hope for. I'm very glad that they took a break to reassess things and improve things, and I'm hoping that maybe a lot of the changes I am about to talk about will sort of be implemented. But with that being said, there are several topics I would like to get into here. I think I'm going to start out just with the pacing, and then I'm going to come back around and finish with talking about my thoughts on the story, because I think that will probably be the most positive note to end on, although in the middle I do have a lot of concerns. Okay, so this is something I'm not going to get too into the weeds on because they have already said that they're going to be changing it, but I do believe, and this is a positive thing, that having larger chunks of story released at once will actually give players a better chance to digest what's going on in the story and have time to actually connect with the plot and with the characters, to give them a chance to have discussions and come up with theories and make fan art, instead of having these very sort of halting little snippets sprinkled over very short intervals. Okay, next. Oh, do we only get one page? Is it like one page per day? What's going on? Okay, I can't click the next one. Is that normal? Is everybody experiencing this? Absence makes the heart grow fonder, after all. I have not studied game design specifically, but as someone who is very passionate about learning theory and behavioral science, sometimes the anticipation of a reward, specifically of a larger reward, can be a lot more reinforcing than the reward itself. Which is why certain gambling and certain types of video games can be so addictive. Giving players a larger amount of content to look forward to, you're really sort of playing into that psychological a phenomenon of anticipation and then payoff. When things are just being drip-fed constantly, there's nothing to really build up to. And the one page at a time release schedule also just sort of interrupts the natural flow of reading and makes it hard to become immersed in the story, because it's not really being treated like a story. It's being treated like a daily, in the same vein as the advent calendar. And I'll talk more a bit about that later when I get into my issues with the puzzles and the point reward system. But I think they might have sort of miscalculated the audience and what players really want from a plot. And the issues with the schedule of the pacing are maybe compounded by probably one of the hardest lessons for a writer to learn, which is kill your darlings. This is one I still struggle with myself. And as someone who has spent years starving for lore and character content that is actually sort of meaningful and not just part of, I don't know, an NC event or something, I really, I'm not mad about having extra character content, but given the possible issues with the art budget, which I will expand on later, there are a lot of things like these, single panel, full page establishing shots that maybe weren't necessary and, further contributed to pacing issues, because nothing is really happening on those pages. There's no dialogue.
Alright, so I just kind of wanted to use the Fairies Ruin comic to give you a quick example with what I mean about the pacing and sort of the ineffective use of the comic medium. So, to compare this to The Void Within, this is the first page of Chapter 2, and it establishes how Hanzo sold the artifact to Hubert Noct, and then on the next page we establish that they are going to the Haunted Woods to look for the specific artifact that Hanzo stole. I'd also like to note that within this there are sort of very intentional feeling character interactions. This is sort of building on the history between Bryn and Hanzo and beginning to establish the dynamic between them and Xandra. And then again here, this is really interesting because it's one of those things that I think you notice in retrospect, that Xandra would be making these assumptions about somebody she just met, presumably based on some kind of stereotype or pre-existing bias towards a certain group of people, that that would be the kind of person to decide that the entire race of fairies would need to be eliminated. But anyways, and then on the very next page, they are already in the Haunted Woods. We know this. We do get confirmation that they are at Nox's lair, but we understand from context that that is where they were going and that is where they are now. And again, we have more sort of characterization. All the dialogue really plays into each character and their individual personalities and the relationships between them. And it only took 2 pages to get here, and we get more sort of reinforcement of the underlying relationship between Hanzo and Bryn that sort of builds intrigue and establishes them as characters, and all of that happened in just 2 pages of a 4-page chapter. Okay, but if we compare that to The Void Within, we start out, we have this establishing conversation about how Tavi and Baelia are going to go to Brightvale to try to help out with this gray curse that has befallen the land. And then we get this page, which doesn't really have any dialogue. We kind of get some establishing characterization with the inside of Baelia's house, but this really doesn't tell us anything else about the characters. And then the next page we would have waited a couple days for, that just gives us yet another establishing shot. And then we begin the next chapter, and we have this page, which we could have gone straight from that initial conversation right to here, and everyone would have understood what was going on. And there's really not a lot of meaningful dialogue. I mean, I don't want to, criticize it too harshly, because I really do like the story itself, but a lot of it seems like it was made more as just a piece of art that users could look at as a sort of daily, like I said. And there are a lot of cases in this comic where you could really just kind of switch the dialogue between 2 characters, and it wouldn't really make a difference. The medium isn't really used in a way that sort of takes advantage of opportunities to explore different characters and relationships. They get there, and then just to see these guys, and then nothing really happens, and they immediately leave. Tavi does get saved by Nyx, but it doesn't really feel like it has a lot to say about who these characters are and why those traits are specifically relevant to the story. And finally, I know this is kind of a different situation, and we have 2 characters here that can actually fight, but if we compare that to the Battle of Brightvale from the Fairies' Ruin, There's a lot going on. First, we kind of see another relevant piece of the story in sort of the similarities and the contrast between Hanso and Bryn. Bryn's approach is very much based on principles and duty. She doesn't want to leave Brightvale when they need her. Hanso is, I suppose, more logical but also emotional in the sense that he wants her to be safe as well as himself. And then in this exchange, we kind of see again that he makes to leave, but then we realize that it was sort of all a ploy to get her to come with him, because this is actually something we've seen him do successfully before in the other chapter I mentioned. And it does sort of speak to the way his character thinks, which will be relevant later on. And then again, we see more cues that these both are characters who are willing to make sacrifices and put themselves in danger for each other, which is, again, highly relevant to the way this plot unfolds in this very character-driven story.
And I'll elaborate more on why I think that later. Spoiler alert, it has to do with the quality of the art and the very sort of arbitrary way that a third party is completing them and sending them out, rather than, having the sort of visual storytelling details that the artists and writers might have intended. Again, that's just speculation on my part. Based on what I know. I'm not on the inside. I don't have any connections to TNT. This is just my sort of perception from, I'm also a third party. The lack of puzzles also plays into the issues with pacing, because in a lot of older plots, between chapters, there would be a more elaborate challenge for players to complete that was a piece of the story and invited you to be a part of it. That's why you will see a lot of the time there will be sort of a nod to an issue that the characters are having at the end of one chapter, and then at the beginning of the next chapter, it'll sort of skip to the solution, but kind of give a little bit of a reference to the challenge that the players had just completed. A huge part of the fun of plots were the puzzles for me, and the immersive way in which they were integrated into the storyline, and how genuinely challenging some of them were. Granted, I've changed a lot in the 14 years since we had the Fairies Rune, but I feel like the way this plot has been set up puts the focus a lot more on obsessing over points and doing very sort of mundane daily tasks, rather than really engaging players in sort of the inner workings of the story, and the fun being just the fact that you're there and you're able to participate. It feels more akin to grinding Altador Cup mini-games than actually participating in a plot and having something to chew on and discuss with other users or look up guides for between the release of different chapters. I mentioned this in my Neopets birthday video, but when I saw there was a tea-making activity, because it was, one of the things listed in the achievements, I was so excited. I thought it was going to be something akin to the potion-making puzzles in Tale of Woe, and I was particularly excited about that because those were some things that were really fun to me, but I really struggled with, and I was super excited to sort of have a second go at something similar now that I'm older and hopefully more clever. But it was just a bit of a fetch quest, which is, I mean, it's okay. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure how many people enjoyed that because items were immediately inflated. So there were a lot of issues with that, but I'm not going to get too much into it, just that there's a solutions tab on, the navigation bar for the Void Within, and I'm really starting to wonder what it's even going to be for, because we're, I think, 7 chapters in now, and we haven't even had really a single puzzle that requires a great deal of thought and effort and, a sort of unique approach to solve. And to be fair, like, I really don't want to be too hard on them, especially after hearing, I think it was TNT Unknown in the December live stream about how much effort went into the Cozy Campfire game, and how hard they tried to sort of bring those types of mini games to life, and sort of the triumph that was for them. When I hear things like that, I kind of take a step back, and I'm, okay, like, this is sort of a new team. They're trying to bring these ideas into the modern era of the internet. Things are different now. They're still learning. So I really want to be fair about that, but I also do have some points I would like to make, because it isn't easy to make elaborate puzzles. It's not necessarily just about the coding aspect, but it also sort of takes a specific type of person to be able to put all of those pieces together and come up with ideas of how they're going to work, how they're going to be solved, to make sure that they are solvable and that they're solvable in the intended way. That's not easy either. So again, I don't want to be too critical, but I personally wouldn't be mad if now or in a future event they sort of rehashed puzzles from older plots, maybe updated them a bit or changed them to suit the current narrative. There are a lot of longtime players who were on sort of periods of hiatus and missed 1 or 2 plots, or even people who just recently discovered Neopets, and maybe they weren't even old enough to participate in any of the plots, considering the last one was 14 years ago. So I think it would be really cool to give people the opportunity to experience some of the iconic puzzles that people still talk about, but in sort of this special event, this new era, so that everybody sort of gets a chance to see what they were like. And maybe even some people, like me personally, there are a lot of puzzles from the past that, I would really appreciate the chance to be able to experience them again after doing them only a single time over a decade ago. Obviously, I want to see the current team shine on their own, and in a lot of ways, I think they already have. I also want to sort of honor and respect the efforts and the memories created by the TNT members of the past. So in that way, it does feel a little bit like treading on sacred ground. But I do think that if they still have the code for a lot of these old puzzles on their servers somewhere. Sometimes the best learning experience is by kind of picking apart the way somebody else did things to figure out how you can make it work for you, in creating something fundamentally different. And it was pretty much all HTML activities, as I recall, except for maybe a few things like the Flash game reskin type things you had to play for Atlas of the Ancients. So everything should have withstood the test of time. I just crave one real puzzle, something that I can, spend a couple days working on, something I can use my notebook, something that I can be challenged by instead of daily chores. Give me something I'll remember years later for how engaging it was rather than how repetitive it was. A lot of the old plot steps and puzzles were memorable because they were community efforts. Whether you were sort of a lone wolf player who just looked at a guide that someone else provided on their pet page, or if you're a social butterfly, actively coming up with theories and solutions and discussing it with other people and helping them on the boards. It really gave everyone the opportunity to feel like they were actively a part of that. Just to sort of to be a piece of the community at that particular moment in time, no matter who you were. The closest thing we had to that was really the cipher. That was the thing I saw the community light up most for and really dig into. But it turned out to not really be anything. Although maybe we'll get more context for it later. It'll come back. I don't know. I'm curious to see what the deal with it is, if anything. I went on, I talked about this a lot in my, in the Neopets anniversary video, and I talked about, how I thought it was going to require a key, and there were going to be hints, at different numbers sprinkled throughout the following pages, and I actually kind of made my own little cipher puzzle thing based on what I thought it was going to be, so you can still check that out if you want to. I don't know if anyone has actually solved it or tried to solve it, but it's nothing big. It was just kind of a bit of fun, so I hope if you want to check that out. If you want a puzzle to do, I have a small one for you. But anyways, what else? Oh yeah, with regard to the community part, as someone who has really struggled a lot throughout their life with social anxiety and wanting to be a part of things but being really afraid to initiate contact with others, I really have fond memories of the plot steps that paired you with other players. To see your pet working together with the pets of 3 other people, but not to have any sort of pressure of social interaction, was something that was really special to me, and I think kind of allowed everyone to feel like they were helping and they were a meaningful part of the community, no matter who they were. Alright, so we've talked a lot about puzzles, but with puzzles comes points. Another sort of interesting tidbit about plots of the past is that they were essentially graded on a curve. That's why the plot points weren't awarded until after the plot. They basically didn't exist yet. They were calculated for each user based on the average amount of effort that every user who participated put in, and how much or how many steps they successfully completed, how many Battle Dome challengers they fought, etc. That way, points reflected engagement and rewarded the experience rather than the grind. This plot, however, seems to be very focused on attempting to farm daily site engagement by putting all of the focus on accumulating points through a repetitive set of daily chores rather than participating in engaging puzzles. That is also part of the reason why, in my opinion, the plot point fortune cookies were the one sort of pay-to-win Neopets element that really actually crossed the line. I very much operate on the belief that at this point in Neopets' life, having some paid elements is good. Having premium is good, because any additional revenue source helps to ensure the site's survival. However, both in principle and from a strategic perspective, I strongly believe in the core tenet that at its heart, Neopets has always been and must always be free for everyone. I think there's a delicate balance to be struck between making paid elements worthwhile and still keeping it fair to people who are either just getting into the site and they don't know if it's something they want to commit money to yet, or if they don't have the disposable income to spend on Neopets or a reliable enough source of income to be committed to a subscription model with premium. So in that sense, having an experience that is fun and rewarding and accessible on essentially the same level without having to pay is equally important to getting people into Neopets and retaining that player base, regardless of how people's, financial situations might change over time and individual preferences. And also creating an experience that is fun and engaging enough for people to want to pay to get some extra quality of life features or to just support the site that they love. In the same spirit as how points were awarded differently in past plots, the sort of rationale behind incorporating puzzles and sort of moving away from the purely war plot formula was so that all players, including those who weren't great in the Battle Dome, had avenues for participation. And likewise, any NC elements, like for example, the luminous casks from the obelisk or the Hubert Knox's Corridor of Chance in the Fairy's Ruin, were incorporated as sort of plot elements or plot adjacent elements that were completely separate from the main experience, and your ability to pay did not in any way impact your status with the actual plot activities themselves. And having these paid features for plot points specifically also sort of plays into these very sort of empty and exploitative mechanics that I mentioned or kind of touched on previously. Instead of having plot steps that are just fun to do as part of an immersive narrative, presenting users with the option to pay to get more points in a shorter time frame, and even in some cases exceed the maximum amount of points, even just slightly, that payers who weren't paying real money would be able to get, further reinforces this this sort of compulsive pressure to maximize your daily points by mindlessly grinding out a daily set of tasks. Farming points just for the sake of farming points instead of being engaged in the experience itself. That being said, I am a strong believer in innovative change based on what current data and science indicates, rather than just clinging to tradition for tradition's sake. However, looking at relevant knowledge to inform decisions also means looking at what made this work in the past, what set Neopets apart and allowed it to survive a decade of neglect despite all the odds. How do we reinforce that core and build on it so that Neopets might survive for another 25 years to come? TFR was the first, and for the past for 14 years seemed like it would probably be the last plot to introduce fearless deeds or bonus achievements. However, they had a very different feel than the achievements associated with the current plot. Remember, points and trophies weren't awarded until after the plot concluded. So while there was some pressure to 100% everything, the achievements were presented more as sort of a fun extra challenge for users who wanted to go back and try to complete a step in a different way during the time that piece of the plot was active. And most importantly, and this is the most sort of striking and bizarre difference in the achievement layout, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, but it's the fact that the main achievement, the thing that says you have completed this step, was awarded to everyone who completed it successfully, regardless of how they did it, which is a stark contrast to the Void Within, which had very sort of vague instructions, like complete void works with no mistakes. What does that even mean? Tons of people completed it with no real recognition or achievement, or, you know, a box that they feel they could check off to say, yes, I was here and I finished that plot step, I did it. There was no real satisfaction unless you completed it in that hyper-specific way that wasn't even clearly established as to what it was supposed to be. There aren't any base achievements for users to earn, or, you know, a gauge of progression to show what you've done and participated in without jumping through additional hoops. And even if there were, having everything awarded, all the points awarded up front, changes the entire tone of the plot and how users interact with it. I know there are a lot of good items in the prize shop, and I want to acknowledge that, because I do think that's a very nice thing for people. It's always a positive thing for me to see people being able to get dream items, or things that make them happy, or have access to items that make them feel like they're on more even ground with older or richer or more experienced players. However, that's the only positive I see with the current system. And it is a big positive, which is why I kind of want to tread carefully with what I'm about to say. But when other avenues for obtaining rare or inflated items exist and have been implemented in different prize pools in the quest log. I don't know if it's worth the impact on the plot experience itself to have structured it in this way. And that's probably my hottest take. I don't know. I'm sorry. You know, I personally would prefer if they went back to the older model of averaging everybody's points in the future and not have this sort of point farming simulator model where it's all about the prize shop from the get-go. But I'd be willing to kind of concede that this is fine if, you know, people are really happy to be able to get these items and it's important to them. I'd be curious to know. Sort of moving along with my logic, I've heard multiple users complain about how burnt out they are, how they can't keep up with doing these tasks every day. It's just too much. Having these fixed goalposts and this point total staring you in the face the entire time really cheapens the experience and sort of takes a lot away from the plot part of being part of a plot. Even during the hiatus, people were still feeling the pressure of achievements because they took them away, but they still let you to buy things in the prize shop, which means people were worried about not being able to get the achievement for buying things from the prize shop. That's a bit of a disaster, I'm sorry to say. Although I do think, again, there are aspects of it that are good for everyone, but I don't know if there could be, like, sort of, I don't know, this would be hard to do because, like, if you want to base it on a curve, you can't really release points or trophies at specific intervals during the plot. But I was thinking, like, is there a way to keep it so that there are, like, maybe 3 different prize shops for the different acts that only come out at those points, and then I guess the grand total and the trophy would be rewarded at the end based on where each player sort of falls on the curve of everybody's efforts. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. This kind of goes back to the pacing, but when you have a single page released at a time with a little point reward, each time it starts to feel less like an epic, continuous adventure that had a lot of heart put into it, as it should be, and more like an advent calendar style daily that is very, you know, sort of casual and disconnected.
Wait, we get a prize just for reading the comic?
Which is sad, and I do feel a little bad because I really do appreciate some of the items. You know, some of them were really nice. I got some plushies for my gallery. I think my favorite was the Balia's background in, like, the Fairyland one. I forget what it's called, but it's very pretty and very lovely. And that, like, the rainbow gray pool one is lovely as well. I love those. But at the same time, it's almost like the amount of effort put into having this constant stream of things kind of makes the experience feel even more detached from the story that we wanted to engage in and that we really came here for. And I'll elaborate more on art later, but I see, like, these gorgeous wearables and I really do appreciate them, but I also think, you know, with everything else being said, goodness, what sort of resources went into creating all these wearables and all these items, and could any of that have been better allocated to actually making the comic shine and investing in quality of art that is more worthy of this project? My perspective on this might be kind of different than others, but I've always kind of seen plot trophies as being in a different category than other trophies compared to things like Daily Dare trophies and Altador Cup trophies are probably the best example. Those are very much like a reflection of achievement and point total, whereas plot trophies are more like souvenirs, just to say, hey, look, I was here. Like, I can look at my user lookup and look back on this fun experience that I had. It was always fun to see what they would look like when they were revealed and which one you would get. But having the top trophy also didn't really matter that much. In a sense, every trophy was kind of like a participation trophy. And while I'm older now, I'm kind of a different person than I was 14, 20 years ago. In those times, I never felt pressured to sort of extend myself beyond what was fun for me when I was participating in plots. Okay, back to the potions puzzle in Tale of Woe as an example. There were two of them, sort of two levels of difficulty, and they were some of my favorite and most memorable plot steps because of how they challenged me. But I was never actually able to complete the second, more challenging step. Even then, I didn't feel like I'd failed, and I still don't to this day. If anything, having something that was so challenging to me was that what made it so memorable. There weren't any point counts or achievements hanging over my head. It was fun just because it was fun. It was fun just to try. That's the difference, I think. The activities themselves in this plot are easy. It's the volume of things to do and the point incentive that makes them, in a sense, hard. If you missed the Lost Desert plot, and you want, or maybe if you participated, I don't know, but if you want to sort of get a taste of what at least one of the sort of caliber of puzzles from old plots was like, you can actually still visit the Temple of 1,000 Tombs and map out your temple. I don't think you can do anything with it anymore. I think the statue has been disabled, no matter what you say to it. But it's just fun. It's just fun to do for the sake of doing it. Well, there are still multiple guides on how to make the map, and mine's here somewhere. Let's see, it's actually, I used it as my background on my, my user lookup for part of it, for the About Me section, but here, there's my map. So how it works is like, this is the first room. I mean, some people find it easier, I think, to do it digitally. I like to just use different color markers. So this is the first room, and you can see like all these are open doorways, and I just used like different colors and symbols to represent the different rooms. So like for example, you can see if you ended up in this room, you go through this door, it's the green empty heart, so that would take you down here, and then you could go somewhere else like the orange smiley face room. So yeah, that's how I'm at mine. I'd actually like to, I'm thinking of doing mapping out a temple on my side account. I'm assuming that's allowed, since like it can't give you any Neopoints or anything. I want to double check before I tell you all to go crazy. I'm nervous. I don't know. I'm very, very paranoid about my accounts getting frozen. I try to follow the rules to a T, and whenever something uncertain comes up, I kind of freak out and I question everything. But anyways, sorry. Oh, speaking of the temple, since it's still active on the site, it could easily be used again for something else. And I think maybe that would be really cool. Maybe in a future plot, you could have something where there was a puzzle, you know, one of the 4 scrolls in the scroll room. You could have like a puzzle for each user to figure out which specific scroll they need to find, and then they could go through the temple and figure out which room it was in and find it, and they could just have, you know, that scroll trigger something different, another clue, an advancement in the storyline when you click on it. Maybe there's a spell you need to find or something. I don't know. I'm just having ideas. I think that would be cool to have give users another real chance to explore it, since it is like one of probably the plot steps that I think people talk about the most. Although, you know, different people might resonate more with different types of activities, I'm really grateful this one is still accessible and semi-functional. It's satisfying just to see yourself making progress in mapping out your temple, and it's not something you would necessarily just sit down and do in a single day. And, you know, there are timeouts for several hours if you fall into a trap or you get kicked out. So, you know, it's something you can kind of just casually work on over time. I think, I don't know, it's just, you know, if you want an activity to do, I think it's a lot of fun. And for me, I think it's a really great example of that sort of intrinsically rewarding experience I was kind of trying to convey in this segment, as opposed to the very extrinsic model of this current point-based system. All right. So I think I've made my love of puzzles very clear. So let's move on to possibly one of the biggest of, honestly, multiple elephants in this room, the art. I want to be very careful about this, well, because I do have sort of a basic understanding of what the process these pages go through is like. I have no idea what kind of budget Neopets has, nor do I have any idea what sort of conditions these artists are working under. But anyways, I just want to make that clear. Like, I don't want this to be about the artists. It's a management issue. All I know is that TNT sends their in-house concept sort of sketches to a third party who then completes them, lines, colors, renders them, and sends them back, and then they get posted on the website. And that obviously, because of the release schedule, there needs to be a fairly quick turnaround for each page. Working within such a limited time frame, I know that I, for one, would not be producing anything I'd be proud of. It's hard to work under a lot of pressure. And again, I'm trying to be clear that my qualms are with the management side of things and how the budget is being allocated internally based on sort of my own external perception, with sort of the caveat that I genuinely don't actually know anything that's going on internally, aside from what has been shared online that I just discussed. And so everything about the budget and, what, like, the intricacies of what's gone on behind the scenes is pure speculation on my part. Now, I know I've mentioned this multiple times already, but I just want to reiterate that we have been waiting 14 years for a plot like this, with puzzles and Battle Dome elements, and most importantly, perhaps, a comic. This was, in every way that matters, marketed as a symbol of the Neopets Renaissance. This was supposed to be like the crown jewel of the new era. And for it to showcase art that is so off-model, so low in quality compared to anything else we've seen on the site. So much so that it's become a joke, which is something, to be honest, I'm really glad that we can all sort of have a chuckle about together. But really it is as baffling as it is disappointing. Not just for the users who have either been waiting years for this or who are just now getting to experience a plot for the first time, but I also feel bad for the members of TNT that poured so much effort and passion into creating this story. To have their vision cheapened by art that is so rushed, it is sometimes tonally illegible, is kind of a slap in the face to everyone to whom this plot meant something, and it really tarnishes the face of this new era that Neopets is trying to push. I feel mean. I don't like ripping into other people's art, but again, this is a criticism of the very sort of sterile, corporate way this plot has been set up and managed, rather than a critique of the artists themselves. As I alluded to before, I think, at least to me, it seems like most of the issues with this plot stem from focusing more on the bottom line than on the story and the experience, which I think kind of ironically has had the opposite effect of driving people away. I want to be clear that I genuinely respect and appreciate artists of all styles and skill levels, but this is really not appropriate when you compare it to what it is supposed to be. The fact that the professional services of another business were paid for to represent something that is so precious and integral to Neopets' identity, and this is what they sent back, and both entities decided that this was okay and that they were going to keep going with this, is wild. It pains me to imagine what sort of money was wasted on this. And oh god, like, I feel evil. Am I a bad person for saying that? It's just, if we want to go for sort of, I think maybe some people would say TFR was a bit over-rendered. It did have a very sort of different style than other plots, but I think Curse of Maraqua and the Lost Desert plot were good examples of plots that had sort of a more simplistic style in terms of the rendering, but still within sort of the style and quality we would expect from Neopets. And to order this and get this, it's what went wrong? How does this happen? And different people have different styles evolve and change over the years, and it's not even so much the overall execution that bothers me, at least not as much as what is being presented on the sketches that have so graciously been shared with us compared to the final result, specifically with regard to body language and emotions. To be honest, I'm sometimes not even sure what Nyx's expression is supposed to be on some panels, which makes her very difficult to really connect with as a character. I don't, for example here, I don't know what she's trying to convey other than being vaguely disgruntled? Is she angry? Is she pensive? Is she worried about Junie? Is she annoyed? The struggle to read characters visually is further compounded by the aforementioned disconnect created by the release schedule, which I acknowledge is sort of slated to change after the hiatus, which I'm very happy about, but I just kind of want to give an overview of where we've been thus far. There are times when I've felt like I've needed alt text just to get an idea of what TNT's writers and artists were trying to convey with visual storytelling cues in the facial expressions of different characters. It's sad because I think visually building characterization through dynamic expressions and body language is something Neopets has historically done rather well, even if, I concede the art in older comics didn't always look perfect either, but it was leagues apart from what we've been presented with here. I know it's a lot of work, and I'm not privy to sort of the amount of art direction that goes on behind the scenes when these pages are being exchanged, but it really seems like this third party is just sort of arbitrarily assigning emotions to characters during their lining and cleanup process, and by doing so, they would be completely overriding visual storytelling cues and the characterization, the personalities of different characters that TNT intended for us to be able to extrapolate from this art, from, this very important aspect of telling a story through a visual medium like a comic. We're losing essential pieces of the story, the personalities, and the relationships that were intended, which is honestly one of the saddest and most frustrating things about about this plot so far. And again, I want to say that maybe they were intended to be changed. I don't know. Again, speculation on my part, but just from what I've seen, it does seem like kind of an upsetting state of affairs. Because I want to connect with these characters. I want to experience who they are as TNT intended. There are so many other things I could goof on. I know King Altador is probably the biggest memed upon guy, but this picture, this one panel with King Hagen is so scary to me. Like, if he pointed his finger gun at me with that look in his eyes, I think my soul would shoot right out of my body. And we come to the story, which is again what I wanted to say for last, because I think this is the area where I have sort of the most positive sentiment. I've already kind of touched on some of the issues I've had when I've spoken about pacing, and there are a lot of elements that I really like, even though I'm kind of just still waiting for everything to come together. If you watched my initial reaction to the plot, you probably saw me cry while I was reading the warnings, and, a lot of those sentiments still hold true.
We hope you will stick around with us to the very end of our day. And we will need every person who has ever called this world a home to build together.
One thing I do love about the plot is seeing, like, the different little elements that people have connected to, even if they're not feeling the story as a whole. As someone who has struggled very severely with depression, one of the first things that really touched me was Tavi's initial conversation with Baelia, and just sort of seeing, a very relatable struggle within that, and the emotions that are in play on both sides. I also loved people connecting with Baelia, in terms of her not feeling like herself as a light fairy. And Tavi's, I know this might sound kind of silly, but Tavi's backstory really floored me with how relatable it was. Okay, this probably sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I could really just feel all of those emotions as if they were my own. Because that was my experience. Like, right around the time I graduated high school, I lost my real life friend group, I lost my internet friend group, right, like, when I was losing a lot of people in my family, I couldn't really find connections with anybody else, no matter how much I tried to kind of put myself out there. My world was changing. The internet was changing. This was right around the beginning of the 2010s, when things were going from, the very sort of personal, community-based internet to, algorithms and feeds and branding yourself. And it was just so hard to, like, find people who actually wanted to be friends on the internet. Anyways, I'm sorry. But, it's just like, it can just make you bitter and angry and a little bit crazy. Not necessarily towards the community you lost, but in that sort of mounting frustration and desperation that sort of social isolation can create, and how you can eventually be led to doing things or putting yourself in situations that you never would have otherwise. But on the other side of that, there's that sense of going through that and then being able to find connections or have experiences that do make you glad that you held on and that you're still here. It's funny because this plot was kind of one of those things. Something I spent 14 years hoping against hope for, and then to finally, out of nowhere, get to experience it, and to see the community come alive at a point in my life where I feel like I'm actually more connected to it. And I think most of my criticisms of the story have already been addressed when I talked about the pacing. Currently, there are a lot of plot threads being juggled, but none of them really seem to have tied together in a satisfying way yet. Much of the plot thus far has kind of almost felt like a prelude or like an exposition dump before the real adventure and action take off. Even though at the moment I feel like I don't really have a lot that I can say about the storyline itself, I'm really looking forward to seeing what will be in store for us once the plot resumes. In spite of all my criticisms, I really do have a lot of hope for this plot. I'm grateful. I have respect, like, I love when Aesop is featured in the live streams, because it's just so nice to hear like how much passion and heart he put into this, how excited he is about it as well, and to have people on the team who care so much about Neopets and to have the lore actually getting this kind of attention is really wonderful. And I'm just thrilled to be here and to be able to experience it with all of you. I think I've expressed all of the points that I really wanted to make. This is just my opinion and perspective as someone, and it's very much based on the things that I personally love about plots, but I don't want it to seem like I'm speaking for everyone. So I hope we can really see this plot shine like I know it can in 2025, and maybe give some people a bright spot in their lives. Even if it's just something small like this. I've learned to appreciate the little things, and especially to be able to share it with others is really special as well. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry it's been a while. I have tons of videos I'd like to make, and I hope I can make them soon. I hope you're all doing all right, and I will see you in the void. Bye.